A forbidden love story takes a sudden and heartbreaking turn when a bodyguard learns a secret that drives him away, leaving unanswered questions. And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The chandeliers cast a warm glow across the Grand Plaza Hotel's ballroom as Sarah Whitman stood near the champagne fountain, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. At 32, she commanded attention without effort, her tailored black Givenchy dress and elegant posture marking her as fashion royalty. Yet her green eyes constantly scanned the room, betraying an unease that her practiced smile couldn't quite mask. "Ms. Whitman, over here!" A reporter pushed forward, voice cutting through the classical quartet's music. "Any comment on the recent allegations about your company's manufacturing practices?" Sarah maintained her composure, but her shoulder muscles tensed visibly. Two security guards moved closer, creating a buffer between her and the growing crowd of journalists. The questions continued, overlapping. "What about the factory conditions in Southeast Asia? Is it true your father left specific instructions about the company's direction?" Taking a deliberate sip of champagne, Sarah checked her watch. Another hour of this fundraiser to endure. She'd attended hundreds of these events since taking over Whitman Fashion Group at 28, but the constant scrutiny never got easier. Her assistant, Lisa, appeared at her elbow with a tablet, providing a welcome excuse to step away from the reporters. Across town, in a private training facility, Marcus Reed executed a perfect takedown maneuver on his sparring partner. Sweat dripped from his close-cropped dark hair as he helped his opponent up from the mat. At 35, he moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd spent years honing their body into a weapon. Still sharp as ever, Reed, his former commanding officer, James Martinez, called from the sidelines. "Private sector treating you well?" Marcus grabbed a towel, wiping his face before responding. "Different kind of battlefield, sir. Less gunfire, more board meetings." He glanced around the facility, state-of-the-art equipment paid for by corporate clients who needed the best security money could buy. A far cry from his childhood in Detroit, where his single mother worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. The next morning, Sarah sat in her office on the 40th floor of Whitman Tower, reviewing security personnel files. Recent threats had escalated beyond the usual paparazzi harassment, and her board insisted on upgrading her protection detail. The door opened, and her HR director entered with a tall figure in a perfectly fitted charcoal suit. Marcus Reed stood with military bearing, his dark eyes taking in every detail of the room before settling on Sarah. She rose to greet him, noting how he moved, balanced, controlled, aware. His handshake was firm but measured. "Mr. Reed comes highly recommended," the HR director began. "Former Special Forces, extensive experience in executive protection." "I've read the file," Sarah interrupted, studying Marcus's face. No reaction to her abruptness. "Good. What made you leave military service, Mr. Reed?" "I served my country for 12 years, he replied, his deep voice carrying a hint of Detroit underneath the professional polish. "Now I prefer to choose my assignments. And my clients." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Implying you've chosen this one?" "I researched Whitman Fashion Group thoroughly before accepting the interview. Your company's charitable foundation has done impressive work with veterans' rehabilitation programs." Something shifted in Sarah's expression. Surprise, perhaps, that he'd looked beyond the tabloid headlines. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city. "The media situation has become complicated. I need one who can handle both physical and reputational threats." Marcus joined her at the window, maintaining a respectful distance. "I understand discretion, Ms. Whitman, and I understand that sometimes the biggest threats aren't the most obvious ones." Their eyes met in the reflection of the glass, and for a moment, neither spoke. Sarah turned, extending her hand again. "When can you start?" "Immediately," Marcus replied, accepting her handshake. This time, both noticed how their touch lingered a fraction too long before breaking contact. The HR director began discussing contract details, but Sarah had already made her decision. She returned to her desk, aware of Marcus's presence in a way that had nothing to do with security and everything to do with how he carried himself. Confident but not arrogant, powerful but controlled. It was going to be an interesting arrangement, she thought, provided they both maintained professional boundaries. Neither of them could have known then how thoroughly those boundaries would be tested in the months to come. The camera flashes came in rapid bursts as Sarah exited the restaurant, each burst accompanied by shouted questions that grew increasingly hostile. Marcus moved smoothly between her and the reporters, his broad shoulders creating an effective barrier. His eyes constantly scanned the crowd, noting which journalists were getting too aggressive. "Ms. Whitman, is it true your company is facing a federal investigation?" A reporter lunged forward, microphone extended. Marcus intercepted the movement without breaking stride, his hand firmly but professionally redirecting the reporter's arm. "No questions at this time," Marcus stated, his voice carrying enough authority to make several photographers step back. He guided Sarah toward the waiting car, maintaining contact with her elbow while speaking quietly into his earpiece to coordinate with the driver. Sarah kept her face neutral, but Marcus could feel the tension in her arm. As they reached the vehicle, a reporter shouted something about offshore accounts and money laundering. Sarah's step faltered slightly, so briefly that only someone trained to notice such details would have caught it. Inside the car, Sarah released a long breath, her composed facade cracking. "They're getting bolder," she noted, smoothing her skirt with slightly trembling hands. "You handled it well," Marcus responded, checking the traffic through the tinted windows. "But we should consider changing your regular lunch venue." The next afternoon found them walking through Central Park, a rare moment of relative peace in Sarah's hectic schedule. Marcus had suggested varying her routine to throw off the paparazzi, and something about his quiet confidence made Sarah agree to the impromptu outing. "I used to come here with my father," Sarah said, breaking a comfortable silence. They passed the boathouse, keeping to less crowded paths. Before the company went public, before everything became about stock prices and board meetings, Marcus matched her pace, maintaining a professional distance while staying close enough to hear her soft words. "What was he like? Your father?" "Complicated," Sarah replied, stopping to watch a group of children feeding ducks. "Brilliant with business, not so brilliant with family. After my mother left, he threw himself into work. Built an empire, but..." She trailed off, then smiled wryly. "Sorry, I don't usually share," Marcus finished. When she nodded, he continued, "Sometimes it's easier to talk to someone who isn't part of your world." Sarah studied him, noting how his alert posture never wavered even as they talked. "What about your family?" "Single mom, 2 jobs, Detroit's East Side," Marcus said simply. "She wanted me to go to college. I chose the military instead, but she supported me anyway, came to every ceremony, proud as could be in her second-hand dress suits." "She sounds remarkable," Sarah aged softly. "She was." The past tense hung between them for a moment. "Cancer, 3 years ago." Sarah touched his arm briefly, a gesture of sympathy that sent an unexpected current through both of them. Marcus cleared his throat, redirecting their path toward a less secluded area, trying to maintain professional distance even as his mind registered the lingering warmth of her touch. Later that evening, in his apartment, Marcus reviewed the day's security footage, a habit he developed to identify potential threats and patterns. But he found himself pausing repeatedly on moments with Sarah, her genuine smile when describing her father, the graceful way she moved despite the constant pressure, how her guard dropped slightly during their walk. He rubbed his eyes, trying to focus on potential security risks rather than the way Sarah's perfume had lingered in the car, or how her green eyes held shadows that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. This was dangerous territory. His job was to protect her, not to notice how her laugh changed when they were away from cameras, becoming deeper, more real. The next morning's security briefing was strictly professional. Marcus outlined new protocols for restaurant visits, suggesting alternatives to her usual venues. Sarah listened intently, making notes, every inch the efficient CEO. But when their eyes met during a discussion of transit routes, something shifted in the air between them. "Is there anything else?" Sarah asked, her voice carefully neutral. Marcus hesitated, then squared his shoulders. "The media attention, it's more than just typical celebrity coverage. They're digging for something specific." Sarah's fingers tightened on her pen, but her voice remained steady. That's not unusual in my position. No, Marcus agreed, but their questions are becoming more targeted. If there's anything I should know... You're here to protect me from physical threats, Mr. Reed, Sarah interrupted, her tone cooling notably. The media is a separate concern. Marcus nodded, accepting the rebuff even as his instincts told him there was more to the story. He learned in the military that sometimes the biggest threats were the ones people wouldn't talk about. But he also recognized when someone was closing a door on a conversation. As he left her office, Marcus acknowledged two uncomfortable truths. He was developing feelings that went well beyond professional concern for Sarah Whitman, and she was hiding something that could put her at risk. Both realizations were equally problematic for a man in his position. The Whitman mansion's dining room could have housed a small apartment. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic shadows across the mahogany table where Sarah sat across from her mother, Victoria Whitman, whose perfectly maintained appearance belied her 60 years. Marcus stood discreetly by the door, witnessing the tension build with each passing moment. The board is concerned, Sarah, Victoria stated, cutting her beef Wellington with surgical precision. Your father built this company from nothing, and I've tripled our market share since taking over, Sarah interrupted, her fork scraping against fine china. The Asian expansion is proceeding exactly as planned. Victoria dabbed her lips with a silk napkin. This isn't about business metrics. It's about image. These rumors in the press, your persistent single status, the way you're handling the media. Her eyes flicked toward Marcus. And now this obsession with security. Marcus is necessary, Sarah replied, her voice tight. Or have you forgotten the break-in attempt last month? Darling, we both know what kind of attention personal bodyguards attract. Especially, Victoria paused meaningfully, attractive ones. Marcus maintained his professional stance, but his jaw tightened imperceptibly. Sarah's cheeks flushed with anger. I'm not having this conversation, Sarah stood abruptly. The calm. Penny is mine now, Mother. I don't need your approval for every decision. No, but you need to remember what's at stake. Victoria's voice dropped lower. Your father worked very hard to protect this family's reputation, to protect you from certain consequences. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. Marcus noticed the slight shake, filing it away with other observations that suggested there was more to the family dynamics than apparent on the surface. The dinner ended shortly after, with Victoria's parting words hanging in the air. Just remember, darling, some secrets are better left buried. Later that evening, Marcus received an unexpected call from Jake Torres, a former squad mate from his military days. They met at a quiet bar in the Lower East Side, far from Sarah's usual haunts. You look good, corporate life treating you well? Jake asked, sliding into the booth with 2 beers. Marcus accepted the drink, but didn't take a sip. What's this about, Jake? We haven't spoken in months. Jake leaned forward, lowering his voice. Been doing some private investigation work. A client hired me to look into the Whitman family, specifically some connections to a cartel operating out of Colombia. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but his mind raced. The Whitmans are clean. I vetted them thoroughly before taking the job. Did you? Jake pulled out his phone, showing Marcus a photo. Because this was taken 3 years ago. That's Sarah Whitman in Bogota, meeting with known cartel associates. The image was grainy but unmistakable. Sarah, looking younger and more carefree, sitting at an outdoor cafe with 2 men Marcus recognized from intelligence briefings. His stomach tightened. Who's your client, Jake? Can't say. But here's the thing, the cartel connection? It goes deeper than Sarah, way deeper, and someone's trying to bury it all. Marcus pushed the beer away untouched. Why tell me this? Because you're good people, Marcus. And because that woman you're protecting? She's either a victim or a player, and you need to figure out which before things get ugly. After leaving Jake, Marcus walked for hours through the city, his training warring with his growing feelings for Sarah. He began discreet research, calling in favors from contacts and intelligence communities. Each piece of information added to his unease. The Whitman Fashion Group had numerous subsidiaries in South America. Several board members had made frequent trips to Colombia during the past decade. Large sums of money had moved through complex offshore accounts, and Sarah's father had died under mysterious circumstances just before she took control of the company. In his apartment, Marcus spread out the information he'd gathered. Photos, financial records, travel logs, all pointing to something larger than simple corporate dealings. But it was Sarah's involvement that troubled him most. The woman he'd come to know, strong, principled, vulnerable beneath her public persona, didn't match the implications of what he was discovering. His phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Can't sleep. Too much on my mind. You still awake?" Marcus stared at the message, feeling the weight of undisclosed knowledge between them. He thought about her trembling hands at dinner, her reaction to certain press questions, the shadows in her eyes when her father was mentioned. Everything pointed to a woman carrying a heavy burden. But was it guilt or fear? He began typing several responses before settling on yes. "Everything okay?" Her reply came quickly. "Just needed to know someone was there." Marcus looked at the evidence spread across his desk, then back at her message. In that moment, he realized he was crossing a line he couldn't uncross. His job was to protect Sarah Whitman, but he was falling for her instead. And now, with these revelations about her past, he had to decide whether to trust his instincts her character or the mounting evidence of her involvement in something dangerous. The cartel connection changed everything. If Jake was right, Sarah wasn't just dealing with aggressive media or corporate politics. She was potentially caught in something that could get her killed. Or maybe she was an active participant, using her position to facilitate illegal operations. Either way, Marcus knew he couldn't maintain professional distance anymore. He had to know the truth, not just for his job, but because his heart was already too invested to walk away. The Whitman Towers penthouse office was silent except for the faint hum of climate control. Marcus stood by the windows, the city lights below twinkling like distant stars. Sarah sat at her desk, her usual poise fractured by the photos Marcus had placed before her. "How long have you known?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "The Bogota photos surfaced yesterday," Marcus replied, keeping his tone professional despite the turmoil in his chest. "But I've suspected something was wrong for weeks." The press questions weren't random. They were getting fed information. Sarah picked up one of the photos, herself, 3 years younger, sitting with men now known to be high-ranking members of the Serpiente cartel. Her hands trembled slightly before she steadied them. "It's not what you think," she began, then stopped, laughing bitterly. "Although I suppose that's what everyone says when confronted with evidence of their crimes." "Then tell me what it is." Marcus turned to face her fully. "Because right now, I'm looking at proof that my client has connections to one of the most dangerous cartels in South America. That makes you either a criminal or a liability." Sarah stood abruptly, anger flashing in her eyes. "You don't get to judge me, Marcus. You have no idea what I've been through, what I've had to." She cut herself off, visibly collecting herself. "I can't tell you everything. It's not just my secret to keep. I can't protect you if I don't know what I'm protecting you from." Marcus stepped closer, his voice softening despite his professional resolve. "These men are killers, Sarah. Money launderers. Drug traffickers. Whatever they have on you, they don't have anything on me," Sarah interrupted sharply. "I went to Bogota to investigate them. My father." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I discovered some inconsistencies in our South American operations. Shell companies' unusual cash flows. When I started asking questions, I was told to leave it alone. But you didn't, would you?" She met his eyes directly. "I traced the money back to Colombia. Made contact with someone who promised information. Those men in the photo, they weren't meeting with me. They were meeting with my contact. I was just there to observe." Marcus processed this, his tactical mind analyzing the implications. "Your father found out?" Sarah's face tightened with pain. 2 weeks later, he had his accident. The investigation ruled it natural causes, but she turned away, facing the windows. "I backed off after that. Took control of the company, focused on legitimate operations. I thought if I just moved forward, built something clean. But now it's catching up," Marcus finished. "The press attention, the threats, someone sending a message. I don't know who's behind it," Sarah admitted. "Could be the cartel, could be someone inside the company. I'll try to trace the leak, but you should have told me." Marcus cut in, frustration edging his voice. "I'm trained for this kind of situation. Instead, You let me operate blind while real threats were closing in. I was protecting you. Sarah whirled back to face him. The less you knew, the safer you were. I never wanted. She stopped, emotion making her voice rough. I never wanted you involved in this mess. You're too. Too what? Marcus stepped closer, the professional distance bet. We them evaporating. Too important, Sarah whispered. The admission hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Marcus reached out, almost touching her cheek, then dropped his hand. I can't do my job if I'm compromised, Sarah. And right now, my feelings for you are compromising my ability to think clearly. Sarah's breath caught, but Marcus continued, his voice hardening with resolve. I'm submitting my resignation. I'll recommend a replacement. No, Sarah grabbed his arm. Marcus, please. I know I should have told you everything, but I couldn't risk. That's exactly why I have to leave. He gently removed her hand. Because you don't trust me enough to let me help, and I don't trust myself to remain objective. Not with you. The pain in Sarah's eyes made him want to take it all back, to pull her close and promise to fight whatever was coming. But his training won out. He'd seen too many operations fail because of emotional attachments, too many good people die because feelings clouded judgment. I'll stay until your new security detail is in place, he said formally, moving toward the door. But after that, it's better if we don't. Don't you dare make this about professional ethics. Sarah's voice cracked with anger and hurt. You're running away because you're scared. Not of the cartel, not of the danger, but of what's happening between us. Marcus paused at the door, his knuckles white on the handle. You're right. I am scared. Because every instinct I have is screaming to stay, to protect you, to... He took a steadying breath. But I can't protect you if I can't think straight. And I can't think straight around you anymore. He left before she could respond, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. In the elevator, he leaned against the wall, remembering the feel of her hand on his arm, the way her voice broke when she said he was important to her. His phone buzzed, a text from Jake with more information about the cartel connection. Marcus stared at the message, knowing his decision to leave was tactically sound, but feeling like he was making the biggest mistake of his life. In his years of military service, he'd learned that sometimes the right strategic choice felt wrong in your gut. But he'd also learned to trust his instincts, and every instinct was telling him that walking away from Sarah Whitman would haunt him for the rest of his life. The private investigation firm's office was deliberately nondescript, tucked away in a building that had seen better days. Sarah adjusted her dark sunglasses, grateful that her new security detail was easier to evade than Marcus had been. The thought of him sent a familiar ache through her chest, but she pushed it aside. Ms. Johnson, the investigator, David Chun, used her alias without blinking. Please come in. Sarah had spent 2 weeks building this connection, using old contacts and careful maneuvering to find someone who could dig deeper into the cartel's operations without raising flags. Chen's office was cramped but organized, walls covered with newspaper clippings and complex flowcharts. What have you found? Sarah asked, settling into a worn leather chair. Chen pulled out a thick file. The Serpiente cartel has been using fashion companies for money laundering for decades. But here's where it gets interesting. He spread out several documents. Your father wasn't just aware of it. He was actively trying to stop it. Sarah's hands trembled as she picked up a document. What do you mean? These are internal memos from 15 years ago. Your father discovered that someone high up in Whitman Fashion Group was facilitating cartel operations. But instead of going to the authorities, he started his own investigation. Why wouldn't he report it? Chen's expression was grim. Because the connection went deeper than business. Look at this. He handed her a photo that made her blood run cold. It showed her mother, Victoria Whitman, at a private party 20 years ago. Besides her stood a man Sarah recognized from her own Bogota surveillance. Younger, but unmistakably the same cartel leader. They were laughing, comfortable with each other in a way that suggested long acquaintance. Your mother's maiden name wasn't really Preston, Chen explained quietly. Before she married your father, she was Victoria Ramirez. Her family had connections to the original founders of the Serpiente cartel. Sarah felt the room spin slightly. That's impossible. My mother. She's always been about social status, about maintaining the family's reputation. The perfect cover, Chen noted. Who would suspect a socialite obsessed with propriety? Your father figured it out eventually. That's why he started documenting everything. He hesitated, and that's probably why he died. Sarah stood abruptly, pacing the small office. If what you're saying is true, then my mother, she's been working with them this whole time, using our company, not just working with them. Chen pulled out another document. According to this, she's one of their key money laundering architects. The legitimate business practices your father built, she used them to create a perfect pipeline for cartel funds. A memory surfaced, her mother's words at that tense dinner. Your father worked very hard to protect this family's reputation, to protect you from certain consequences. There's more, Chen continued. Your father's brother, James Whitman, the one who supposedly died in a boating accident before you were born? He didn't die. He went into witness protection. He was going to testify about the cartel's banking operations. Sarah sank back into the chair, her world tilting on its axis. My mother told me he died before I was born. I've seen his grave. Empty coffin, Chen said grimly. The cartel arranged the fake death to send a message to your father. Control through family, it's their specialty. Sarah thought of Marcus, of pushing him away to protect him. Now she wondered if she'd made exactly the wrong choice. She needed his strategic mind, his understanding of complex operations. More than that, she needed someone she could trust completely. One of your mother's closest friends, Chen was saying, Gerald Maxwell. He's been acting as a liaison between the cartel and various fashion houses. Not just yours. They've infiltrated half the major brands in New York. Sarah remembered Gerald, always present at family events, always watching. She'd grown up calling him Uncle Jerry. The betrayal burned in her throat. Her phone buzzed, a message from her mother. Dinner tonight, darling? We need to discuss the company's direction. Sarah stared at the message, seeing it with new eyes. Every family dinner, every piece of maternal advice, every criticism of her management style. Had it all been about protecting cartel interests? What do you recommend? She asked Shun, her voice steady despite her internal turmoil. Carefully gather evidence. Build a case. But Ms. Whitman? His expression was deadly serious. Watch your back. If your mother suspects you're investigating. Sarah thought of Marcus again, remembering his military efficiency, his tactical mind. She'd pushed him away to protect him, but now she wondered if she'd lost her strongest ally. She tried calling him that evening, but the number was disconnected. His replacement agency had no forwarding contact. It was like he'd vanished, taking with him her last chance at having someone she could truly trust. Standing in her penthouse that night, Sarah looked out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably thinking she'd been complicit in the cartel's operations. The truth was worse. She was the daughter of one of their key operators, raised in a web of lies so complex she was only now beginning to understand its scope. Her mother's dinner invitation glow. Ed on her phone, a beacon of false normalcy. Sarah typed back a polite refusal, knowing that every interaction now carried hidden danger. She was alone in this fight, surrounded by people she couldn't trust, missing the one person who might have helped her unravel it all. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to protect Marcus from her family's darkness, she'd lost the only person who could have helped her face it. The underground parking garage of the Ritz-Carlton echoed with Sarah's footsteps as she approached the meeting spot. Her old friend from law school, Michael Torres, now worked as a federal prosecutor, and he'd agreed to this secret meeting only after extensive precautions. She ditched her phone, taken 3 different cabs, and doubled back twice to ensure she wasn't followed. "You look terrible," Michael said by way of greeting, emerging from behind a concrete pillar. "Thanks," Sarah managed a wry smile. That's what happens when you discover your entire life is built on a criminal enterprise. Michael glanced around the garage before speaking. "I've verified everything your investigator found. Your mother's connection to the Serpiente cartel goes back 3 generations. But Sarah," he lowered his voice, "this is bigger than money laundering. We're talking about a sophisticated international operation. Fashion shows used to transport drugs, runway models unknowingly carrying encrypted data, design houses serving as fronts for weapons deals." Sarah felt her knees weaken. The Asian expansion, is probably a cover for establishing new trafficking routes, Michael confirmed. Your father's documentation suggests he was gathering evidence for years, building a case that would have exposed everything. But someone found out. My mother, Sarah said flatly. We can't prove it yet. But the timing of his death, the sudden shift in company policy afterward. Michael pulled out a USB drive. This contains everything we have so far. Banking records, surveillance photos, shipping manifestos. But Sarah, if they realize you have this, they'll kill me, she finished. Like they killed my father. Your mother's friend Gerald Maxwell has been asking questions about you. About who you've been meeting with, where you go when you ditch your security detail. Sarah's blood ran cold. How do you know that? Because he approached one of our undercover agents, thinking they were a corrupt cop. He's looking for leverage on you. A car door slammed somewhere in the garage, making them both jump. Michael quickly handed her the drive. We need more concrete evidence before we can move on this. The cartel has too many politicians and judges in their pocket. One wrong move, and they'll bury everything. And me with it, Sarah slipped the drive into her jacket. Be careful who you trust, Michael warned. These people, they're experts at using family ties to control people. Your mother is not my mother anymore, Sarah cut him off. Not after what she's done. Later that evening, in her secure home office, Sarah reviewed the files. The scope of the operation was staggering. Whitman Fashion Group was just one piece of an intricate network spanning continents. Fashion shows in Paris, Milan, and Tokyo had served as covers for major drug transactions. High-end boutiques laundered millions in cartel money through inflated sales figures. Her phone rang, Gerald Maxwell's number. Sarah let it go to voicemail, her heart pounding. The message he left was casual, friendly. Sarah, darling, just checking in. Your mother's worried about you. Let's have lunch tomorrow. Catch up properly. The threat underlying the friendly words was clear. They were watching her, waiting to see what she'd do with her newfound knowledge. Sarah poured herself a scotch, her father's preferred drink. She remembered him in his study, working late into the night, supposedly on company business. Now she understood. He'd be in gathering evidence, trying to protect her from the truth while simultaneously working to expose it. Her security system chimed, indicating movement on the penthouse terrace. Sarah froze, then quickly transferred the files to an encrypted cloud service and wiped the drive. The terrace door opened. Ms. Whitman. It was just her new security guard doing his rounds. Everything okay? I noticed your office light on. Fine, she called back, hiding her relief. Just working late. After he left, Sarah sank into her chair, trembling. She couldn't trust her security team. They'd been hired through channels her mother could influence. She couldn't trust her executive staff, many of whom might be complicit. She couldn't even trust her childhood friends, all connected to the same corrupt social circle. She thought of Marcus again, wishing she could share the burden of knowledge with someone trained to handle such dangerous situations. But she'd push him away to protect him, and now, her computer chimed with an encrypted message from Chun. Maxwell booked a flight to Bogota tomorrow. Taking company jet. Passenger list includes your mother. Sarah stared at the message, her mind racing. A meeting with cartel leaders? Or something worse? She needed to know what they were planning, but following them would be incredibly dangerous. Another message from Chin appeared. Don't even think about following them. They'll be watching for it. Sarah began typing a response, then stopped as her office phone rang. Her mother's private line. Darling, Victoria's voice was smooth as aged whiskey. I hope you're not working too hard. You seem distracted at the board meeting today. Just focused on the Asian expansion. Sarah kept her voice steady. Ah yes, Asia. A pause. You know, your father never quite understood the importance of international relationships. It led to unfortunate complications. The threat was subtle but clear. Sarah thought of the files on her computer, the evidence of decades of criminal enterprise. I'm not father, she said carefully. No, you're not, Victoria agreed. You're much smarter. Smart enough to know when to stop asking questions that don't concern you. After hanging up, Sarah sat in the darkness of her office, her mother's words echoing in her head. They knew she was investigating. The lunch invitation from Gerald, her mother's call, they were giving her a chance to back off. But Sarah had inherited her father's determination along with his business acumen. Tomorrow, she would begin planning her counterattack. She just hoped she could stay alive long enough to expose the truth. Marcus sat in his Spartan apartment in Brooklyn. Surveillance photos spread across his desk. He hadn't stopped investigating the Whitman case, despite his official resignation. His military contacts had provided disturbing intelligence. Increased cartel activity in New York's fashion district, unusual movement of assets, and most worryingly, a series of accidents befalling people who'd asked too many questions about Whitman Fashion Group. The guilt had been eating at him for weeks. Walking away had been the professional choice, but everything he'd uncovered since then suggested he'd left Sarah in serious danger. His phone buzzed, Jake Torres calling. "They're moving on her," Jake said without preamble. Maxwell booked the company jet to Bogota. Victoria Whitman's going too. But here's the thing, they've also hired some professional talent. The kind you and I used to hunt. Marcus's jaw tightened. Hitters, top shelf, 2 teams. One following Sarah, one handling cleanup. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore. Standing, Marcus moved to his gun safe. Why now? What changed? Someone's been digging into old files, connecting with federal prosecutors. The cartel's nervous. Jake paused. Marcus, this goes deeper than we thought. Victoria Whitman isn't just connected to the cartel. Her family helped found it. The fashion empire? It was built as a laundering operation from the beginning. Marcus thought of Sarah's face when he confronted her with the Bogota photos. The pain in her eyes hadn't been guilt. It had been recognition of betrayal. She was investigating them, Marcus said quietly. Not working with them. Yeah, following her father's footsteps. And you know how that ended for him. Jake's voice was grim. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Marcus was already checking his weapons. I need everything you have on their security teams. Building layouts, schedules, known associates. Already sending it. But Marcus? Be careful. Victoria Whitman makes the cartel bosses look merciful. She won't hesitate to eliminate her own daughter if Sarah threatens the operation. After hanging up, Marcus accessed his secure laptop. He'd maintained surveillance on Sarah through back channels, watching as she met with investigators, dodged her security detail, worked late into the night. She was getting closer to the truth, but she was also getting sloppier, taking risks, missing the tail cars, failing to notice the new maintenance workers in her building. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from his old commanding officer. Satellite imagery confirms cartel movement. Whatever's going down, it's happening soon. Marcus pulled up the building plans for Whitman Tower. He'd memorized them during his tenure as Sarah's security chief, but now he studied them with new eyes, looking for extraction routes, defensive positions, blind spots in the security coverage. The smart play would be to hand everything over to the FBI, let them handle it. But federal investigations took time, required warrants, followed procedures. Sarah might not have that kind of time. His secure phone line rang. The one only 5 people had the number 4. The caller ID showed his former teammate, Lisa Chun. Marcus, you need to see this. Lisa's voice was tense. Sending you footage from inside Whitman Tower. Gerald Maxwell just called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. But get this, he's also booked a private security team. Heavy hitters, former special forces. Marcus watched the footage she sent. Maxwell's movements were too precise, too practiced. He's not planning a board meeting. He's setting up an ambush. That's not all, Lisa continued. Victoria Whitman's been liquidating assets, moving money offshore. Major transfers in the past 48 hours. They're preparing to burn everything down. And Sarah with it, Marcus finished. He pulled up Sarah's schedule. She'd be at that board meeting, walking right into their trap. Standing at his window, Marcus watched the city lights flicker. He'd walked away to maintain professional distance, to keep his feelings from clouding his judgment. But everything he'd learned since then pointed to one conclusion. Sarah wasn't the threat. She was the target. His training told him to stay out of it, to let the proper authorities handle the situation. But his heart remembered the way Sarah's voice shook when she talked about her father, the genuine pain in her eyes when she pushed him away, trying to protect him. Lisa, he decided, I need a full tactical package. And call an alpha team. All of them. Already done, Lisa replied. They've been on standby since you started investigating. Jake's got transport arranged. We move on your word. Marcus began gathering his gear, his movements precise and practiced. He'd spent his entire career preparing for missions like this. High-stakes extractions, time-sensitive operations, impossible odds. But this time was different. This time it was personal. His phone lit up with another message from Jake. Thermal imaging shows increased activity at Whitman Tower. Whatever they're planning, it's happening tonight. Not tomorrow. Marcus checked his watch. 3 hours. Until dawn. 3 hours to get to Sarah, neutralize the threat, and get her out before her own mother could have her killed. "I'm coming," he whispered, though Sarah couldn't hear him. "Hold on." The safe house was a converted warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn, its industrial exterior masking a secure facility inside. Sarah stood at a reinforced window, watching Marcus prep tactical gear with his team. He'd extracted her from Whitman Tower just hours ago, moments before Maxwell's security team could spring their trap. The rescue itself had been a blur. Marcus appearing in her private elevator, the urgent whispered warning, the careful navigation through service corridors. Now, in the harsh fluorescent light of the safe house, reality was setting in. "Your mother's team moved early," Marcus explained, laying out surveillance photos on a steel table. "They were planning to use the board meeting as cover. Make your disappearance look like a nervous breakdown. Bodies don't get as much attention when the victim has a history of instability." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she picked up a photo. "And my mother? Already in Bogota. She left right after authorizing Maxwell to handle the situation." Marcus's jaw tightened. "We intercepted communications. She's meeting with cartel leadership, probably to ensure their support for what comes next." "The complete takeover of Whitman Fashion Group," Sarah concluded. "With me gone, she'd have full control. All those Asian expansion plans would become new trafficking routes," Jake Torres added, entering with more intel. "Your mother's been planning this for months. The increased security, the media pressure, the board's sudden concern about your leadership. It was all orchestrated to isolate you." Sarah turned to Marcus, their first real moment to talk since his departure. "Why did you come back?" The room fell silent. Other team members suddenly finding reasons to check equipment or step outside. Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Because I was wrong," he said simply. "I thought maintaining professional distance would help me protect you better. Instead, I almost got you killed." "I pushed you away first," Sarah reminded him. "Try to protect you from all this." "We're both idiots." Marcus's mouth quirked slightly. "Highly competent, well-meaning idiots." Sarah felt something in her chest loosen, a tension she'd been carrying since he left. "So what now?" Marcus gestured to the tactical layouts. "We have evidence of the cartel's operations, thanks to your investigation and my team's surveillance. But it's not enough. We need proof of your mother's direct involvement, something that can't be buried by their lawyers." "The private servers," Sarah said suddenly. "In my father's old office. Mother converted it to her private study after his death, but she never changed the hidden safe room. He showed it to me once, said it was where he kept his most important work. The evidence he was gathering against the cartel." Marcus nodded. "But getting in there will be nearly impossible," Jake interjected. "The tower's locked down tight. Maxwell's team has control of all access points." Sarah straightened a plan forming. "Not all access points. There's a private elevator, installed when the building was first constructed. It connects to the old pneumatic mail system. My father used to joke it was his escape route if the board meetings got too tedious." Marcus was already pulling up building schematics. "It's not on any official plans, because it was my grandfather's pet project. A direct line from the sub-basement to the executive floor." Sarah traced the probable route. "The entrance is hidden behind a false wall in the wine cellar. Nobody's used it in years, but it might be our only shot," Marcus finished. He studied her face. "It's dangerous. If we're caught." "I know," Sarah met his gaze. "But I'm done hiding. My father died Tr. to expose this operation. I won't let his death be for nothing." Marcus nodded slowly. "We'll need a distraction. Something big enough to draw Maxwell security away from the executive floor." "The charity gala," Sarah said immediately. "It's tomorrow night. Every major fashion house in New York will be there, including several that are probably part of the cartel's network. Perfect cover. Jake agreed. Security will be focused on protecting their operations from exposure. If we time it right, we can get to the servers while they're managing the chaos, Marcus concluded. He turned to Sarah. But you'll have to attend the gala. Be visible. Keep their attention while we access the building. I can do that, Sarah's voice was steady. I've been playing a role my whole life without realizing it. I can play one more night. Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping, so only she could hear. This isn't like your usual events. If they realize what we're doing. I trust you, Sarah said simply. Their eyes met, the unspoken feelings from weeks apart hanging between them. I should have trusted you from the beginning. Marcus's hand brushed hers, the brief contact sending electricity through both of them. We'll figure this out, together this time. Around them, the team continued preparations, but for a moment, it was just them. A woman ready to reclaim her legacy and a man who'd broken every professional rule to help her do it. The danger ahead was real, but for the first time since discovering the truth about her family, Sarah felt hope. Together, she agreed, and began to outline everything she knew about the gala's security protocols. The Whitman Fashion Group's annual charity gala transformed the tower's grand lobby into a glittering showcase of wealth and power. Sarah moved through the crowd in a black Givenchy gown, playing her part perfectly. The confident CEO, slightly troubled by recent media attention, but determined to maintain appearances. You're doing great. Marcus's voice came through her nearly invisible earpiece. He and his team were already in position, using the service entrance to the wine cellar while Sarah kept Maxwell's attention upstairs. Gerald Maxwell approached, champagne in hand. Sarah, darling, we missed you at the board meeting this morning. Migraine. Sarah smiled apologetically, her heart racing. But I couldn't miss tonight. Too many important people to disappoint. She gestured at the crowd of fashion industry elites, many of whom, she now knew, were complicit in the cartel's operations. Team 2 in position, Jake's voice crackled in her ear. Security cameras on the executive floor are looped. Maxwell touched Sarah's elbow, his grip slightly too tight. Your mother called earlier. She's concerned about your recent interests, the people you've been meeting with. Is she? Sarah kept her voice light. How nice of her to worry, though I'm surprised she could find time during her busy trip to Bogota. Something flickered in Maxwell's eyes. Basement access secured, Marcus whispered in her ear, moving to the pneumatic system entrance. You know, Sarah, Maxwell steered her toward a quieter corner. Your father had similar concerns about company operations near the end. Similar, investigative tendencies. Did he? Sarah took a sip of champagne, forcing her hand not to shake. How fascinating. Do tell me more about my father's final days, Uncle Jerry. I'm sure you remember them well. In the basement, Marcus and his team located the hidden entrance behind the wine racks. The old pneumatic system's tunnel was narrow but serviceable. Beginning ascent, he murmured into his calm, Sarah, keep him talking. We need 5 more minutes. Maxwell's pleasant expression had hardened. Your mother always said you were too much like him. Too principled. It's admirable, really, but principles don't build empires. No, Sarah agreed. Krim, he does that much more efficiently, doesn't it? Before Maxwell could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Sarah recognized Jake's team implementing their distraction. A drunk guest causing a scene, accusing another socialite of wearing knockoff designs. Reaching executive floor, Marcus reported, standing by for safe room access. Maxwell's phone buzzed. He checked it, frowning. If you'll excuse me. Of course, Sarah smiled. Duty calls. As Maxwell moved away, Sarah circulated through the crowd, maintaining visibility while her heart thundered in her chest. Through her earpiece, she heard Marcus working on the safe room's lock. Got it. Marcus's voice was tense. We're in. But Sarah, there's someone else here. Sarah's blood ran cold. What? Hello, darling. Sarah turned. Her mother stood behind her, elegant in Chanel, looking completely unsurprised. Did you really think I was in Bogota? Teams compromised. Jake's voice crackled with urgency. Multiple hostile elements converging on the executive floor. Victoria took Sarah's arm, her grip like steel. Let's continue this conversation somewhere more private, shall we? In the safe room, Marcus and his team found themselves surrounded by armed men. But what captured their attention was the wall of monitors showing live feeds from fashion houses across the globe, each one displaying cartel operations in real time. "Your father built this room to gather evidence." Victoria's voice came through Sarah's earpiece. She was patched into their comm system. "I repurposed it to manage our true family business. Marcus, dear, please don't try anything heroic. My men have orders to shoot." Sarah's mind raced as her mother guided her to the private elevator. "How long have you known? About your investigation? From the beginning. About Marcus's return? Please, darling. Did you think I wouldn't have contingencies for a man of his capabilities?" The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. Sarah saw Marcus and his team, weapons surrendered, surrounded by Victoria's security. The safe room's monitors cast an eerie blue glow over the scene. "I must admit," Victoria sighed, "I had hoped you would be more amenable to joining the family business. Your father's conscience was tiresome enough. But you," she touched Sarah's cheek almost tenderly, "you had such potential. To become a criminal?" Sarah pulled away. "To profit from other people's suffering? To understand power," Victoria corrected. "The fashion empire was always a means to an end. Your grandfather understood that. I understood that. Even your father understood it eventually, though his understanding came too late to save him." Marcus caught Sarah's eye, a subtle movement drawing her attention to his hand. While everyone focused on Victoria's monologue, he was slowly reaching for something in his boot. "The cartel isn't just an organization, Sarah," Victoria continued. "It's our heritage. Your great-grandfather started it all, using post-war fashion houses to move product across rebuilt Europe. Every generation has played its part. Except father," Sarah said quietly. "Your father was weak," Victoria's voice hardened. "He thought exposing us would somehow protect you from your birthright. Instead, he died for nothing. And now, the lights went out. In the darkness, Sarah heard Marcus move. Gunshots erupted, muzzle flashes illuminating the chaos. Someone grabbed her arm, Marcus, pulling her behind a desk. "Now, Jake," he shouted into his comm. An explosion rocked the lower floors. Jake's backup team breaching the building. Victoria's voice cut through the darkness. "Kill them both." In the strobing emergency lights, Sarah saw her mother's face, no longer elegant and controlled, but twisted with rage. The mask had finally dropped, revealing the true monster beneath. "The servers," Sarah gasped as Marcus pulled her toward the EXI. "The evidence, already uploaded," he grunted, returning fire at their pursuers. "Your father's dead man switch. Everything copied to secure servers the moment Victoria accessed the system." They reached the stairwell, alarms blaring throughout the building. Below, they could hear Jake's team engaging Victoria's security. Above, more of the cartel's men were descending. Sarah looked at Marcus, both of them knowing they were trapped. But in his eyes, she saw not defeat, but determination. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Victoria's voice echoed through the stairwell. "You can't escape, darling. This was always your destiny." Sarah gripped Marcus's hand. "No," she whispered. "Not anymore." The stairwell echoed with gunfire as Sarah and Marcus moved upward, their options dwindling. Victoria's men were above and below. The building was in lockdown, and backup was still fighting through the chaos of the gala evacuation. The roof, Marcus decided, pulling Sarah higher. Jake's got a helicopter standing by. A bullet ricocheted off the railing, sending sparks flying. Sarah's designer heels were long gone, her gown torn for mobility. Through her earpiece, she could hear the FBI teams finally breaching the building, responding to the evidence Jake had transmitted. "It's over, Mother," Sarah shouted into the stairwell. "The FBI has everything. The shipping records, the money trails, all of it." Victoria's laugh floated up from below, eerily calm. "Oh, darling, did you really think your father was the first to try exposing us? The evidence means nothing without witnesses, and dead whistleblowers tell no tales." They burst onto the roof, the cold night air whipping Sarah's hair. Marcus immediately moved them behind a ventilation unit as bullets peppered the door behind them. 2 minutes to extraction. Jake's voice crackled through their comms. The roof access door slammed open. Victoria emerged, still elegant in her Chanel suit, a pistol held with practiced ease. Maxwell flanked her with more armed men. "I have to admit," Victoria called out, "I underestimated your resourcefulness. Using your father's old pneumatic system? Brilliant. He would have been proud." Her voice hardened. "Before we had to kill him, of course." Sarah felt Marcus tense beside her, ready to move. But something in her mother's words caught her attention. "Wait, did you think I acted alone?" A new voice joined them on the roof, aged but strong. Sarah's blood ran cold as her grandmother, Elizabeth Whitman, stepped into view. "Impossible, ça whispered. You died years ago." A necessary deception, Elizabeth smiled, her silver hair gleaming in the moonlight. "Your father was getting too close, too determined to expose our work. He needed proper motivation to stay quiet. A tragic loss to remind him what happens to troublemakers in this family." Marcus's hand found Sarah's in the darkness. "3 targets," he murmured. Victoria at 2 o'clock, Maxwell at 11, Elizabeth by the door. "My own funeral was quite touching," Elizabeth continued, moving closer. "Your father's grief was so convincing. He almost had me believing he'd learned his lesson. But then he started gathering evidence again." She sighed. "Some people never learn." "You killed your own son," Sarah's voice shook with rage. "I protected the legacy," Elizabeth corrected. "Just as your mother protected it by eliminating your Uncle James when he threatened to testify. Just as we'll protect it now." The helicopter's distant thrum grew louder. Victoria raised her gun. "Last chance, darling. Join us. Accept your heritage. Or join your father." Sarah met her mother's eyes. "You know what father told me? That day he showed me the safe room?" She slowly stood, Marcus tensing beside her. He said, "Sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to end something." Several things happened at once. The helicopter appeared over the B. Yielding's edge, searchlight blazing. Jake's team burst through the roof access behind Elizabeth. And Sarah pressed the detonator her father had hidden in the safe room all those years ago. Explosions rocked the building's foundation. Strategic charges placed throughout the structure, designed to destroy specific evidence caches. Victoria stumbled, her shot going wide. Marcus moved with military precision, tackling Maxwell as Sarah dove for cover. FBI, weapons down. Federal agents swarmed the roof, led by Michael Torres. Elizabeth's calm facade finally cracked. "You stupid girl. That evidence was our protection, our leverage." "No," Sarah stood, watching her grandmother's empire crumble. "It was father's insurance policy. Everything that just burned? Copies. The originals were uploaded the moment you accessed the system." Victoria lunged for Sarah, rage distorting her features, but Marcus was faster. He intercepted her, disarming her with brutal efficiency as FBI agents moved in. Elizabeth Whitman, Victoria Whitman. Torres began reading rights as agents secured the prisoners. Gerald Maxwell, you're under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder. Sarah watched as her mother and grandmother were handcuffed, their masks of aristocratic dignity finally shattered. Elizabeth's last words carried over the helicopter's roar. "You've destroyed generations of work. Your own family." "No," Sarah called back. "You destroyed this family. I'm rebuilding it." She turned to Marcus, who hadn't left her side. "Starting now." Hours later, in the FBI's downtown offices, Sarah sat with Marcus, watching the news coverage. The headlines were explosive. Fashion empire revealed as cartel front. 3 generations of crime queens. Whitman heir exposes family's criminal empire. "What happens now?" Marcus asked quietly. Sarah looked at the emerald ring on her finger, her father's last gift. "We clean house. Rebuild the company legitimately. Honor the legacy my father died trying to protect." She turned to him. "That is, if you're willing to stick around this time?" Marcus took her hand, his thumb brushing over the ring. "I'm not going anywhere. Although," he smiled slightly, "I might need a new job title. Security chief seems a bit redundant now." "How about partner?" Sarah suggested, the word carrying multiple meanings. In the interrogation room down the hall, Victoria sat in handcuffs, her elegant facade finally broken. Elizabeth was in another room, probably already negotiating with prosecutors. The cartel's fashion empire was crumbling, its secrets exposed to the light. But here, in this quiet moment, Sarah felt only peace. Her father's death was avenged, his work completed. The shadows of the past were finally receding, leaving room for something new to grow in their place. Marcus pulled her closer, understanding in his eyes. "Partner," he agreed, and kissed her, not as a protector, not as a security chief, but as an equal. Someone who had seen the darkest parts of her world and chosen to stand beside her anyway. Outside, dawn was breaking over New York, the sun rising on a new chapter. There would be challenges ahead: rebuilding the company, testifying against her family, dealing with the media fallout. But for the first time in years, Sarah felt truly free. The weight of her family's secrets was gone, replaced by the strength of a different kind of legacy, one built on truth, justice, and love. The empire of shadows had fallen, but from its ashes, something better would rise.